Welcome to the Sandpit Startups podcast, where we journey into the minds of the brightest and the best founders the region has to offer. We're here to connect the founders in the studio with the founders sitting at home. We sincerely hope the next half an hour motivates, inspires, or educates you. And if it does, you know where the follow button is.
In today's episode, we welcome 2 out of the 3 founders of Middle East Advisory Partners, Steve Drake and Paul Donnelly. Based in Dubai, it's a boutique corporate advisory firm that services owner-managed small-medium enterprises. With a collective experience of over 100 years in consulting within the team, they provide services along the full life cycle of a business, from fundraising, scaling, exiting, and much, much more. Get ready to gain valuable insights about this firm and how they unlock the full potential of such businesses. Thank you, Steve, and thank you, Paul, for joining us on the show.
Thank you for inviting us.
Welcome.
So guys, where do we start? If we were to throw it over to you, where would you like things to start off?
Well, when you say 100 years, you make it sound very old. I guess that is part of the USP of the business. It's about having the years of experience of having worked either in corporates or with corporates to understand where some of their issues are going to be. So we are deliberately older, and that's why our collective experience is what it is.
I think also, Sam, you touch on a very, very interesting point. Where do we start? Because that's why we exist. A lot of business owners have a starting point, but they're not really sure where to go next. And that's where we often can sit in and support and drive their business forward with them to wherever it wants to go, wherever they want to take it, which is, you know, again, as I say, exactly what we bring to the table to clients.
Mm-hmm. You could almost say you're like the oldest startup out there.
Well, I guess we're not the conventional model, no. We're not 20-somethings.
Yeah.
Well, with the term consultancy, right, it's been overused in today's business landscape. So as a boutique advisory firm, how would you differentiate yourself from the other consultancies out there?
Yeah, it's a good question. There are lots and lots of consultancy practices in the market now. It is a word that's overused. We don't see ourselves really as consultants. We're an extension of the client. So a lot of what we do is sitting in alongside the owner, sitting in alongside the CEO, sitting alongside the managing director of the business, to extend their bandwidth. And as much as the term consultancy is about the short-term role, let's call it, that is what we can offer. But our clients become the trusted advisor. We become an integral part of their team rather than just drop in and drop back out on a consultancy basis, if you like. So our engagements can last anything from a daily engagement through a month right the way through to, you know, a long-term 6, 12, 18-month period. So that's not the typical consultancy model.
Yes, it's quite different.
Yeah, let me maybe just add a bit further perspective on that. So if you think about the genesis of the business, why did we do this? Why did we create a startup, particularly at our ages? My personal background was Big Four advisory for a long time. I had a great career, enjoyed it, traveled the world with the firm and had some great experiences with some great clients. But the typical model in the larger organizations, the larger firms, is very much large clients. So big corporates, big government type exercises, type projects. But most of our economies, not just in the region, but globally, the real powerhouse to them and the creators of wealth is the owner-managed and the SME sector. And the larger firms are not really geared up to supporting them. They're smaller, the fee base is too high, a whole host of different things. And also the traditional consulting model, it tends to be about the senior people winning the work and having the handshake. I'm not trying to be derogatory, but the delivery then tends to come from more junior people. Yeah. So if you can create an operating model where the delivery, as Paul has just said, the senior people are an extension of the owners of the business, then you're actually providing them with a value add that I don't think the traditional consulting model necessarily does, at least to the level that we do. So they get us full time, they get us 100%. And that's really the genesis of this business, being able to provide that senior resource 100% of the time to our client base in a sector that we think is underserved.
I wanted to dig a bit more into that why. Perhaps not from like an emotional point of view, but more like the logistics of things. Not that there's a conventional time to start a business, but typically you see a lot of 20 or 30-year-olds doing this, that sort of age range. and especially while you guys have got so much experience, you could walk into any top firm in any major city in the world. What is it about this region that has like captivated you in terms of starting your own thing and becoming founders?
Yeah, I mean, I think Steve touched on it very briefly there. We're long-term residents of the region. The big boys are already playing alongside their peers, the big companies. The startup world here in the Middle East is huge, as is the SME sector, as is the family-owned businesses. They don't get the support that possibly they need to help them out. And therefore, I suppose we looked at our own careers and said, what can we do to help others? Yes, we get rewarded for it, but what can we do to help others to change their business for the better? And I think that's kind of what was the passion behind it, the passion that drove us to kickstart this venture.
Yeah, I mean, this region's incredibly dynamic. And has been for a number of years. As long as I've lived here, 16 years now, there's been constant change and constant development, and perhaps nowhere better reflected than right here in Dubai. If you see the vision of the country that's by necessity had to move from an oil-based economy to something else, it's developed in a number of stages. The population has grown, the types of companies and the types of sectors have grown. It's benefited extremely well from COVID most recently with relocations from elsewhere in the world because it's very business friendly. So it just creates its own dynamic ecosystem and quite concentrated within that owner-managed and SME sector that we focus on to therefore make that the business ecosystem for us much more viable than trying to say, go back to the UK or Europe or wherever it is, where quite frankly, those economies are a lot more depressed than what we see here. So the environment is there for us to thrive.
Okay. Also, considering this like a startup, right? So scaling a service business is it's daunting, right? It has its own unique challenges. So how have you so far navigated the complexities of growth and getting the business forward?
Yeah, so I mean, we started out with let me rewind just a second. Our USP is also one of our biggest weaknesses in the fact that we don't know necessarily what the clients want immediately. So we do a lot of prodding and poking to get to what is their pain and where can we step in and help. So therefore, from that, we kind of started off with friends and family network and our wider kind of business networks that then helped us to establish, let's call it a client base initially. And, you know, success breeds more success.
Yes,
so our own scaling model started off very simply with us using our own networks. To the growth of that is evident in a client specifically that Steve's working with at the moment. It doesn't fit into our particular model. However, they need the exact same support and services as an SME or a family-owned business may need. But these guys are a lot bigger than what you would consider an SME. So our scaling model has been through tactical approach, but step by step through networks and network accelerating.
So you say you're working with a lot of different type of businesses, especially some that perhaps are not really conventional for how you guys operate. When you start to like peel back the layers and do all this poking and prodding, do you find that there's a lot of similarities between these types of businesses?
Yes.
We're smiling at each other. yeah, 100%.
Something's popped up in your mind.
Generally, the answer is yes. Yeah. So for me, a common thread with the owner managed and the smaller business is bandwidth. So if you were to say, what do we really do? We really provide owners and C-suite with bandwidth. Yeah.
Okay.
So if you go to an Emirates or an EMA or any of the big organizations, they have lots of departments with lots of people. The smaller businesses, the owner managers, they can't afford that infrastructure. So necessarily they don't have as many people and therefore they lack bandwidth. And therefore the ability to see things because they're running 24/7 to run their businesses, or be able to understand some of the issues that they've got and then how to deal with it. One, they don't necessarily have time for, and two, they don't necessarily have the visibility and the understanding of. So the value that we therefore bring is the ability to see that and therefore to be able to unlock that. So whether it is, Paul Paul's got a client at the moment where he's supporting scaling that business. They've grown very well, but they've now plateaued and they need to work out how to move forward. Or a client that has grown very well, but their operations have not kept up with revenue. So revenue has grown significantly, but their cost base has got very lumpy, very chunky because they haven't necessarily focused on it. Whatever the issue is, it tends to be the same problem, bandwidth. Yeah.
Okay.
And that manifests itself across any type of business issue ultimately with the kind of clients that we have.
How would you define bandwidth?
Yeah, let me, if I may just touch on that as well, though, Sam, because probably one of the major problems we see is owners have few trusted support people. And as their business grows, they become a bit like the pyramids, where they still sit at the top and they end up with this army of people underneath them that are afraid sometimes to say no or yes, whatever the case may be. So all things lead back to the owner or the managing director, whatever you want to call the guy at the top. But what we can bring in there is just that sounding board for them.
Okay.
And that can be through the various different kind of functions within the business. And the terminology I used a lot, it probably came out of COVID a little bit, is we all baked banana bread during COVID.
What's that?
But banana bread.
I know what banana bread is.
We all baked it during COVID.
Okay.
But once you've baked so many banana breads, how many more do you bake and what do you do with them? Yeah, and that's where a lot of these owners get to. They've been doing the same thing time after time after time, which is great for a startup, great for a small business. But when you're starting to convert into becoming an enterprise or bigger, those same things can't continue to happen. You've got to change.
Mindset.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You get stuck. So you've got to find a way of changing that. And I guess that's what we bring.
And you need a fresh perspective. So if there is an issue in the business, to the people who are in it, who have been part of the issue, are they able to step back and say how to resolve that? Typically not. You need a fresh perspective. So how I define bandwidth is ultimately depth and quality of resource. Yeah. So again, if I go back to my large corporate example, let's just say they wanted to do a deal, they wanted to acquire a business to grow. They'll normally have an M&A team who'll do that.
Yeah.
They'll assess that
In-house.
business. They'll do the diligence on that business. They'll value that business. But if an SME wanted to acquire to grow, they're not going to have an M&A team internally. So they're not going to have the
That talent
bandwidth
is missing.
or the depth of skill set to be able to make that assessment properly.
Yeah, I had on the way here, I had a message come through on my phone, and it was a guy telling me, do you remember that proposal I put to you about raising finances? Well, I'm doing a deal. I would like to raise X amount of money, and this is the return I'm going to give. To be very frank, I've just kind of pushed that SMS to one side because it's of no interest to us. Because what this guy's trying to do is just get an injection of cash very quickly, short-termism.
Okay.
But that's because that's what he's done before. And
Right.
if he really wants to accelerate his business,
Think bigger and
he's got a strategy. He's got to have a strategy around it, not just texting people and asking for money, because that doesn't work. Not when you get to a certain size. So
And that raises an interesting point, I think, for me. And the region is in part a victim of its own success. So because it does have a great startup stroke early stage ecosystem here, and there are a lot of funders here interested in that, I think the rest of the world sees it as paved. The streets are paved with gold, and everybody's asking for money. And of course, everything can't be funded, and therefore, ultimately, there's a scarcity of where the cash goes. But yeah, there's a lot of interest in not just entities here, but entities overseas coming to the region to try to raise funds.
Yeah, and I mean, and you talked about what is bandwidth. Just because Steve mentioned overseas there, Stephen, our other partner, Stephen and I met a business 10 days ago who have done very, very well out of the UK. But they recognise that there's a real market potential for them here in this region. And they've been here on holiday, but they've no idea how or where to start in this region. Well, we're not going to become your sales force for you in the region, but what we will be able to do is signpost you to the right places and I guess be the eyes and ears on the ground whilst they are making the home business, i.e. in this case, the UK, very sustainable, very solid, but getting additional opportunity in a new geographic territory. And I guess that's a kind of another expression of bandwidth that we bring.
Interesting. So there was something you said, which is obviously like when businesses start to scale, and obviously we talk to a lot of founders and they say off camera, they don't really like to talk about it, but what would you say to them in terms of like what they need to prepare for when things do kick off, they get the proof of concept and then things just explode, maybe after they get funded and they start to really get the ball rolling?
I mean, we have a great example with a client we're currently working with.
Okay.
They've got proof of concept. They've got a small amount of very high quality clients. And they're in the situation where for them to then now scale the business, they need money. They need to build out their platform. They need to build out their sales and marketing capability to be able to reach out to the right type of clients. It's a global business. And the issue that we're finding with them is this exact question. So how do you now scale it? Because their business has so many applications in various geographies, in various sectors, with various client types. They only have so much, I'll go back to the word bandwidth, but they only have so much capability, even when they hire people, to be able to scale to a certain level over a certain time period. And the issue we've got is defining what that looks like over the next 3 to 5 years. Because if we can't define that, we think it's an impediment to actually being investable, raising the money, and then scaling the business. So it's got to be a clear vision. It's got to be I think it has to be a sensible rollout, has to be a strategic rollout. And that then allows them to be able to put the mechanisms in place to be able to follow that rollout. So that could be a sales plan, but also the underlying operational architecture that they need to be able to deliver it. And that just takes a bit of a rational head. Some people think, this is great, I'm going to get money for this, I'm going to get it funded. But as you say, you have to think about, well, once I do that, how do I scale it effectively, and how do I make sure I've got the right infrastructure to deliver it?
Yeah, which reminds me of the other client that we work with who has a real aspiration to grow, but through acquisition. They want to go out and acquire other businesses through various different means, which is great. And that's a fast track way to accelerate your business growth.
Yeah, these are probably proven concepts. You just acquire them and it's directly adding to your revenue stream.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But what if they don't? Or what if it fails? Or what if they don't fit into your business model?
The synergy.
And this is part of the issue that we feel with some of these clients is unless you have a plan, how do you execute it? So you've got to make sure that you've got a concise strategy, not necessarily from inception, because it will change, it will evolve, but through evolution, your plan's got to change as well. But it's also got to fit back to the core of your business. Otherwise, the walls could come crumbling down around you very quickly.
So it's often said that the best ideas come from unexpected places, right? But can you share a moment where inspiration struck in one of your projects where you did things differently? Where was it recent past or?
Well, everything you do is different.
Well, I can think of a client situation where something we said as advisors made them do something differently.
Okay.
Or think of the situation from a different perspective. So this is a client that's a big business. It's going through a little bit of stress at the moment, and therefore it needs to change. I'd say it's a classic. It's grown really quickly, but the infrastructure behind it hasn't been there to support it. And therefore, a number of things have happened in the business that haven't been well controlled, and the leadership haven't necessarily seen. So in the work that we've been performing to support them, it's been quite evident that a number of types of projects and engagements that they've entered into have been what you describe as non-core. And as a result of that, their ability to deliver on them has been challenged, and therefore creating some of the stress. But it was through ourselves looking at, well, what is the business? What is it doing? What are the types of projects that they're entering into, to try and identify and strip out the non-core, then enable the leadership to think, actually, I haven't been looking at it through that lens, but now I need to, because I understand instantly where some of my issues are coming from. And therefore that's changed behavior and changed the way that the individual looks at the business.
Yeah, and if I rewind right back to our early days, we met a client, and it was a bit of a realization moment during our kind of brain dumping session that we had with them, where this guy was traveling around the world 47, 48 weeks of the year delivering what he delivers. But that business is not scalable because it's just him. So everything's locked in here.
Yes.
All the intelligence, all the knowledge. Sorry, I'm pointing here because that's my head, just so we're all clear on the mic.
Is it Santa, by the way?
It was Santa, yeah.
Delivering all over the world.
Yeah.
But he's delivering.
he does it in a night. I mean,
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, he's even better.
He's talented.
Scalable.
We are not scaling his business.
He's doing fine.
But no, so this business owner was, I mean, great business, but unfortunately not scalable because he was the only person in the business working and delivering in the business. So the light bulb moment came when we talked about how does he digitize it?
Right.
Because if he can digitize that business and then sell his services overnight,
Yes.
he becomes, well, double, quadruple, and the rest is history.
Yeah.
Has it happened is a different discussion,
Yeah.
but the model was there. And that light bulb moment came on very early in our own journey of MEAP. So I suppose that would be a light bulb moment in terms of how you can change your model quickly.
But just to add a
please.
point, I think it is important for any business, whether it's a startup or not, is that you've got to constantly challenge the norm. Don't get comfortable with things might be working well for a period of time, but there'll be something at some point in time that will upset the apple cart.
Yes.
And you've got to be prepared for that. You've got to reserve for that. Yeah. So particularly important for cash flow and funds.
Yeah.
And you therefore got to be able to react to that. So my suggestion, my advice always is to business owners is to think when that moment might be, start to prepare for it, think differently, challenge yourself. Don't get stuck in the norm. If things are going well, they could turn south.
Yeah, Steve sort of picked up on the disruption word there. And a client that I'm working with at the moment, they've got a major problem with lots of stock and cash flow may be a bit of an issue for them. So they've got to sell that stock to get the cash
get
moving.
The inventory out.
But some of that inventory is dating. And they are in an industry where you may need one screw, one bolt, one chain a year.
Yeah.
But their minimum orders from their suppliers is hundreds. So their inventory for one particular item might last them 12, 15, 20 years.
Yes.
But what they quickly identified through a lot of brainstorming sessions was that actually they won't be alone in this. There'll be other people in their industry globally that will be in the same predicament.
Right.
So from there has been a creation of an online tool that enables people in their same industry having the same problem to share their stock, their inventory online to say, do you want the widget? I may be in Mexico or I may be in New Zealand, but I've got this widget and I can get it to you. And that saves you buying it from a manufacturing source that's going to have a minimum order quantity. So just by building that platform that's disrupting the industry as the norm, it's changed the dynamic of this business.
Yes.
So, it's just because Steve picked up on that word there, I thought I'd bring that to attention.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
So obviously your language is KPIs and numbers and revenue and profit and all that stuff, right? But I think there's one KPI that's not really talked about very much, which is happiness. So there's two types of business, obviously performance businesses where it scales to the moon and all that great stuff. But there's also lifestyle businesses. Do you guys consult with them? And if so, how do you operate? How do you make someone's life happier?
Let's go back to the start, Sam.
Oh, yeah.
We've got 100 years experience. We're old. We're definitely not happy.
Oh, okay.
No, I'm joking. I think it's this term happiness is, it's something that's come out more and more, in recent times, and employees are looking for a much more balanced life, and happiness being part of that is really important. I don't think we've had any engagements in terms of generating happiness yet, but I can see it coming.
Maybe they've gone to the therapist
Instead. Yeah. But we have done some work in the human resource kind of space and the employee engagement space. We've looked at employee share programs, share schemes. So all of that has got an angle towards that happiness area.
Yeah.
I think it's fair to say that we're not quite there in terms of offering advice on that yet, but we'll get there. We'll find a way to bring that to our solutions.
Okay.
But I've always taken
I want commission on that one, by the way.
Yeah.
We don't advise on it, but from a personal perspective throughout my career, it's happy employees, whether it's at home or at work, are obviously crucial for themselves, but also for you as a business, because typically any business is highly reliant upon its workforce, and therefore that workforce has to be happy. But I always thought people used to talk about work-life balance. I don't know if they do so much now, and happiness may be the new word for work-life balance, but people would always say to me, my work-life balance is not the same as somebody else's. Yeah. Some people want to take more leisure time. Other people are happier to work, longer hours because they enjoy it and it fulfills them. So I don't think we should look at it from the perspective of people work less and therefore they're happier. It's just what is the right balance for the individual to be happy.
Yeah, if you don't mind me sharing a little story, I worked with a CEO for a European conglomerate, and I remember the CEO challenging the audience about work-life balance, and he actually, let's say he picked someone out the audience as opposed to picked on someone, and he challenged them to say, if you're looking for work-life balance, find a new job. It's just life. Yeah, you've got to enjoy it. No matter what you do, you've got to enjoy it. I think it's really strong. It's a really strong kind of ethos. Probably easy for him to say when he's CEO of a conglomerate. However, I think it's a strong message to give off.
Yeah. I think that's why it's called balance, right? Like it's different for everybody.
Yeah,
you got to find that balance.
Yeah, culture is super important to any business, and I think there's also an angle where an entrepreneur, a startup, a small business, that owner will be passionate and probably willing to put 24 hours a day in.
Yes.
But will his employees have that same ethos? You've got to find a way of buying them into that, I suppose.
Absolutely.
That's right, yeah. So, guys, we're running out of time here. We've got a few more minutes. Is there anything you'd like to leave our viewers with? Any nuggets of knowledge or something you want to shout out? The floor is yours.
Oh, he's put me on the spot now.
Yep.
No, look, I think from a small business perspective, it's really difficult because often you'll feel like you're in a box on your own. And I guess from a small business owner's outlook, knowing that people like us are available with our experience, intelligence, age, and everything else we bring to our business. I think knowing that we are here will help other business owners, and we're happy to talk to anybody.
Awesome.
Yeah, and for me, I just like to reiterate kind of the reason we had the conversation in the first place, and it was about the region and about the ecosystem for smaller businesses in this region. And as I said before, I think it's a great environment. And we see, although we're supporting clients directly, they also support each other. So the small business support each other. There's networks, there's communities, there's different groups and forums. And I think it's a great environment for that. So it isn't just about working with entities like ourselves. It's about reaching out to your fellow small businesses and sharing your pains and also your successes.
Yeah, it's a nice note to end on. Yes. So with that, thank you so much, guys. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Thanks.